Hello, welcome to Module 5, DHCP, Advanced DHCP, and DHCP Relay. This week we are going to be setting up a DHCP Relay server so that our Windows 10 computer can use the Relay server to get a DHCP address from the DHCP server that we developed last week. So before you get started, first things first, we want to go ahead and power on our Server 2019 GUI and our Windows 10 Pro computers and log into them and just make sure that we're getting the IP addresses that we're supposed to be getting so that we know that DHCP is working. So you can see here that I have my DHCP server up and running. It may look a little bit different than last week because I have taken the hard drives and thrown them onto my host computer so that everything runs a little bit faster, so that these labs can be a little bit quicker developed. But nevertheless, once we open up our scope inside of DHCP, we can see that we have sent out some IP addresses, one which is our reserved 100 that we did last week, and this new one here, which is actually this new Windows 10 Pro computer that is now on my desktop system instead of on a external USB drive. So everything runs a little bit faster. So if we open up our Windows 10 computer and we go to our command prompt and we do an ipconfig, we see that we have that 192.168.80.101 address. So everything is working the way it's supposed to as far as DHCP is concerned. So now that these are running, our next thing that we actually have to do is we have to build another server. The reason that we're building another server is so that we can actually perform the DHCP relay. And before we do all of the stuff to our DHCP server that we're going to do, we'll just go ahead and get this server started so that we can continue on. So we're going to create a new virtual machine by right-clicking in the white space over on the left-hand side of our VMware workstation. And custom machine, we're going to click next. Workstation 16 or 17, whatever one you're using is fine. We are going to install from a ISO file, and I'm just going to go to my desktop where I've saved this, and there's my server. And click next. I'm not going to worry about a product key. We're going to do Windows Server 2019 Standard, not Standard Core, Standard. We'll name this one, we're going to name this one Router, and then CNT password for our password. Next. It tells us we didn't have a key. No worries about that. The virtual machine's name is going to be Router. And we're going to save this on our desktop. Well, in your external drive. I'm doing it on my desktop because it makes things faster. So on your external drive, in your CNT folder, under virtual machines, and you're going to create a new virtual machine or a new folder, call it Router, and hit OK. So your path should be your external drive, CNT 211, virtual machines, and Router, unless you're saving them on your host computer like I am. Firmware type, we'll stick with BIOS. No need to change that up. Number of processors is fine. And we'll make this 4 gigs. Now, depending on your computer requirement or your computer's capabilities and your memory utilization, we're going to have 2 servers and 1 Windows 10 client running. Our first server, I bumped that one up on mine up to 16 gigs. I actually dropped it back down to 8. And then our Windows client is probably running 4 gigs or 2 gigs, depending on what you're doing. So my point here is that I have 32 gigs of memory. if I'm going to be running my host computer plus a client and 2 servers, I need to make sure that I'm utilizing no more than my maximum memory. Otherwise, everything's going to run really, really slow. So if I'm using 8 gigs on my Windows Server 2019 and 4 gigs on my Windows 10 Pro and 4 gigs on the new server that I'm developing, that's a total of 16 gigs. So I'm still in the clear. I have 16 gigs for my host computer, so I'm fine. But make sure that you're paying attention to those numbers, because the amount of memory that you're utilizing for each machine is going to be dependent, and it's going to cause issues if you don't have enough memory. So if you only have 16 gigs in your computer, you should be cutting the numbers that I'm using in half. So instead of 8, you'd use 4, 2, and 2. If you have less than 16 gigs, we're back to the situation of you probably shouldn't be taking this class online. But I'm using 4 gigs on this one because all it's going to be is a relay agent. It doesn't need a whole lot of memory. So I'm going to click Next, and we're going to use a host-only network, and click Next. Leave it as the logical drive, that's fine. Leave it as an NVMe, that's fine. And we're going to create a new virtual disk. We can leave this as the 60 gigs. It doesn't need to be much bigger than that. Click Next. And then we're going to change where we're saving this to the virtual machines folder, the router folder, and inside there, we're going to create a new folder and call it virtual disk. So again, if this is on your external drive, it would be your external drive CNT211 virtual machines router virtual disk, and hit save. Click Next, and we're good to go. Okay, now that we have our router created, we can go ahead and log in, CNT password. And we are going to do one extra little step to this. We have to add a second network card to this computer so that it can work between the 2 different networks that we want it to work between. So we're going to go ahead and close this. We can minimize that for now. We're going to right click on our router over here on the left hand side, and we're going to click on settings, and we're going to add another network adapter. So now we have 2 network adapters, our host only one and our NAT one. And we're actually going to set up the NAT one as a host only. Actually, we're going to set it up as a custom and set this up for VMnet 2. And then hit OK. And now if we right click on our network settings and go to network and internet settings, and we click on change adapter options, now we have 2 network adapters. And this is very, very important to have for this server to be a router, which is what it has to do in order to be a relay agent. So setting that up is absolutely imperative. So now that we have that, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and go back to our Windows Server 2019 server. And we're going to do some configuration changes. So the first thing that we want to do is we actually want to create a second scope. The reason that we want a second scope is because we're going to be dealing with 2 separate networks. In this case, we'll have our 80 network, but we'll also want another network that we'll be able to use as well. So we'll click on our IPv4 in the DHCP MMC, and we'll just click New Scope. And we'll click Next. This one we will call network 2. And I'm going to give it the description for DHCP relay. Click next. Our starting IP address, we'll go ahead and say 192.168. Let's do 5.100, and we'll end on 192.168.5.199. Make it in a little bit smaller of a scope. Doesn't need to be the entire range of the subnet. We're just giving out some IP addresses. We don't need to worry about exclusions. We don't need to worry about changing the lease duration. We do want to configure the default gateway, and we want this to be 192.168.5.1. Now, this address is very important. This is also going to be the IP address of the router network card for that device. And we'll click next. We don't need to worry about a parent domain, anything like that. Click next. Don't need to worry about wins. And we'll go ahead and activate the scope. So now we have our scope, which is on the 192.168.80 network, and we have our network 2 scope, which is 192.168.5 network, and they're both active. And now that we have those, we can do something called creating a super scope. And what a super scope does is it takes both of these 2 scopes and basically turns them into a single utilization scope. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on our IPv4 again, and we're just going to right click on it and say new super scope. We can click next, and we'll name this one super scope, including our scope and net 2. We'll click next, and we're going to select both of these by clicking on the first one and then hitting the shift and pressing the down arrow. Then we'll click next and finish. And now we have ourselves a super scope with both of our scopes inside of it. For the DHCP relay section, we don't actually want to have this super scope. So what we want to do is we actually want to right click on the super scope and delete it now that we've created it. I know it's silly to create something and then delete it, but nevertheless, you know, showing you that you can create a super scope was really the only purpose of that. So now what we need to do is we're going to go ahead and set up DHCP relay. So in order to do that, we're going to come back over to our router computer that we created. And before we can get started on that, we want to make sure that we have a couple things set up. Okay, now that our server is built, let's just go ahead and make sure that we can connect to our Windows Server 2019. In order to do that, we want to first make sure that we know what our IP address is for our Windows Server 2019. So we'll do a command prompt and an IP config. And you can see here that our IP address is 192.168.80.10, and we have a default gateway of 192.168.80.2. Now, both of those addresses are very important because our router is going to be this 192.168.80.2 address, and our router needs to be able to be sure that once it is this address that it can ping the 80.10. So we're going to come in here and we're going to close out of this, and we'll open up our network and internet settings, and we'll click on change adapter options, and we'll leave this where it is right now because we need to be able to identify which Ethernet adapter is the correct one. So we'll open up our command prompt and we'll do an IP config on this. And you can see here that we now have two IP addresses. We have on Ethernet 0, we have the 192.168.80. That's the network that is connected to the server 2019. And then on our Ethernet 1, we have a 169 APIPA address. So we can minimize this, and on our Ethernet 0 adapter, we'll click on Properties and go to TCP IPv4, and we will use the 192.168.80.2 address. Click on our subnet and hit OK. And on our Ethernet 1 address, we'll go to Properties, and we'll click on TCP IPv4 properties, and we'll give this the 192.168.5.1 address. Click on our subnet and hit OK. So now if we go to our command prompt again and type in ipconfig, our IP addresses have changed and they are more appropriate to the networks that we want. So we want to go ahead now and hit ping 192.168.80.10, which is our server, our DHCP server, and you can see that we do have the ability to ping it. Now, one thing that we want to make sure is that we click on our search bar and type in firewall and go to our Windows Defender firewall. And I've already done this, but you want to make sure that you turn off your Defender's firewalls so that from our Windows server, we can ping 192.168.80.2, and we're able to ping over to that router now. So now from the router, we should be able to ping our Windows Server network, and if we had anything connected on the other side to the 5. network, we'd be able to ping that, which we'll worry about that in a second. So we have network connectivity from our Windows 10 to our Windows Server and from our Windows Server to our router. So now all we have to do is set up the router as a relay agent. To do that, we're going to open up our server manager. And we're going to click on Manage. We're going to add roles and features. We'll click Next and Next. Notice that we didn't change the name of our server. We probably should have done that, but because this server is only going to be used for this one lab, I'm not going to focus on that. We'll click Next. Now that we're on our Select Server Roles screen, we can go down to Remote Access and click on the check mark for that. Click Next. We don't need any features, so we'll click Next, and we'll click Next again. And now we want to make sure that we choose the roles of direct access and routing. We don't need web application. Click Next and click Install. And this process might take a couple minutes. Okay, now that that's done, you will see here that it says open getting started wizard. We don't actually want to click on that like we did with other features in the past. We're just going to hit close here. The reason is because we're not going to configure this the way that they want us to configure it. We're going to configure it a different way. So now we can open up our Windows icon and go to our Windows Administrative Tools, and we can just click on Routing and Remote Access. which is right here. And now that we have our routing remote access, we can come to our server, which is our local server here, and right click on it, and we can configure and enable routing and remote access. We'll click next at the top there, and we'll click custom configuration. Click next, and we want to do LAN routing. We're not doing any VPN or anything like that. We're just LAN routing. Click next and finish. And we'll go ahead and start the service. And there we go. Now we have routing and remote access set up. We can see our IPv4. We can actually click on this. We can click on general and see that we have our two different networks. And we can now route between these two different networks. Now, before we go any further, let's go ahead and reboot our server. Since we installed a new feature, it's good practice to always reboot when you install a new feature or a new role on your server. That way the server can get updated and know everything that's going on that it's supposed to have, and we don't run into any issues later on down the road. Go ahead and log back in. Oops. And we can, you know what, I'm going to click on this little box so this little message will stop popping up. We can close out of that. We can come back into Windows Administrative Tools and go back into Routing and Remote Access. And now what we want to do is we want to install a new routing protocol. So we're going to click on IPv4 and we're going to right click on it. Sorry, we're going to click on General in IPv4, right click on it and click New Routing Protocol. The routing protocol that we want is the DHCP Relay agent. It should already be selected. So we'll hit OK on that. And now we can right click on the relay agent and we can add an interface. Now the interface that we want to utilize is the one where the requests will generate from. So Ethernet 0 is our DHCP server, but the requests will come from Ethernet 1. So we're going to click on Ethernet 1. Hit OK. Relay DHCP packets, hit OK. And then we're going to click on this. And we're going to click on properties. And we're going to add the server's IP address of the DHCP server. So 192.168.80.10. And click add. And we'll hit apply and hit OK. So now we have our DHCP server address in our DHCP relay agent, and we have it set up on the right network adapter for us to be able to get a DHCP address. So now all that we have left to do is to test it. So in order to test it, what we're going to do is we're going to come over to our Windows 10 Pro computer. And before we change anything, let's just open up our command prompt and we'll do an ipconfig. And notice that our IP address is 192.168.80.110. This is 101. This is fine. It might be 100 if you are still using the same computer as before. I moved my server so it's not the 100 like you guys will see. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on our Windows 10 Pro over here on the left, and we're going to go to settings, and we're going to change our network adapter from host only to custom. And we're going to change that to VM network. I believe it's 1. Let's click on 1 and hit OK, see what happens. So now that it's on a different network, we've literally, what we just did here, we can go ahead and click yes. What we've just done here is we unplugged this computer from the network and we plugged it into the other side of this router. So now, if we do an ipconfig, ipconfig release and an ipconfig renew, okay, so we're still on the 101. So let's see what happens if we click on settings and we change this custom to VNet 0. And now we do a release and a renew. And you can see that now we have a 192.168.5.100 address. So now we're on the other network. And we were able to get that 5.100 address even though there's no DHCP server on this network, because we were able to relay from the relay agent over to the Windows server. Is that neat or what? So that's it. That's DHCP Relay in a nutshell. What we're basically doing is, if we just drag this over here, make it look a little nicer, we have our Windows 10 Pro computer that's connected to our router that's connected to our Windows DHCP server, and our router is working as a DHCP relay agent to make it so that we can get a DHCP IP address from our client, or sorry, from our server to our client. And that's it. So that's the lab for today. Let's go ahead and switch everything back. We're going to right click on our Windows 10 Pro settings, and we're going to go back to the custom VNet 1, which is where our Windows server's on, and hit OK. We can go ahead and do the release and renew. Now we're back on the 80 network, so that's good. So now this computer can get shut down because we don't need it anymore. And while that's shutting down, we'll come over here to our router. And because we're not going to be using this router anymore, this was just for the relay agent lab, we can just click on this and hit power, and we'll shut it down. And once it's shut down, we'll go through the process of deleting this so that you don't have this system anymore. Now, before you delete this, make sure that you've taken pictures of your routing table, your DHCP relay, all of that, taking those screenshots for your lab. Otherwise, you'll have to do this all over again. But now that we have it shut down, we can right click on this and we can remove this router from our list. Now, all this is doing, it tells you right here, it's just removing it from the library. It's not deleting the virtual machine from the disk. So now that it's removed, now we actually have to go into our disk, into our virtual machine. Oh, this is my external drive. So I want actually desktop, CNT211, virtual machines, and I can just delete this router folder. Now, the reason that I can just delete the router folder is because I've stored everything. When I created my router computer, I stored it all in this one folder. Notice that if we would have stored it somewhere else and it would have been all over the place, we'd have been going all over the place trying to find these different files. But by just deleting this folder and doing this the right way initially, that server no longer exists now. We don't have to worry about it at all. Saves a little bit of space on your external drive, or in my case, on my desktop, and I don't have to worry about having that router anymore. But our Windows 10 Pro still works, and our Windows Server still works. So we're good to go. And now that we're done with DHCP, we can actually uninstall DHCP from this computer if we wanted to. But for now, we're not going to. We're just going to leave it the way it is. If we were in class on campus, we would actually be deleting the DHCP service so that we don't have any issues. But we can go ahead and shut this computer down. And we're done with this lab for today. Make sure you go ahead and click on the like and the subscribe buttons for this video. I really do appreciate it when you do that. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a great day.